We often imagine transformation as a sudden explosion of light, as if one day we awaken entirely new. Yet, in truth, the spirit changes more like the seasons, subtle at first, then undeniable. You may not always notice it happening within you, but there are unmistakable signs that reveal you are not who you once were. Today, let us look at these signs together, not as abstract ideals, but as living truths you can witness in your own journey. When your spirit begins to change, you notice something subtle at first. The life you once lived so comfortably, the habits you repeated without question, the relationships that defined you, and the ambitions that once set your heart on fire. Suddenly, they no longer fit. What used to feel like a home now feels like a garment one size too small, pinching and pressing against your skin. And this can be deeply unsettling, because it is not always obvious that this is growth. In fact, at the beginning it often feels like failure. You might look at yourself and wonder, why don't I enjoy what I once loved? Why does this success, which I worked so hard for, suddenly feel empty? Yet the truth is this: nothing has been lost. Instead, something new has emerged. I once spoke with a young professional whose whole identity had been built on achievement. Long hours at the office, endless projects, the constant pursuit of promotions. These things once gave him meaning. He was celebrated by his peers, admired by his family, envied by his classmates who had not made it the way he had. But then, one morning, he walked into his corner office, sat at his desk, and felt nothing. Not pride, not excitement, only hollowness. He thought something was wrong with him, perhaps burnout, perhaps weakness. Yet what was really happening was that his spirit had outgrown its shell. Like a snake shedding its skin, he could not remain inside what was once protective, but had now become suffocating. This is not an isolated story. Research on career satisfaction shows that most people will experience at least 2 major career shifts in their lifetime. These shifts rarely happen because of laziness or lack of discipline. Instead, they arise because the deeper values of the individual evolve. What once aligned with their soul no longer resonates. And when spirit and circumstance fall out of alignment, discontent begins to whisper. That whisper, though uncomfortable, is a sign that the soul is stretching into new dimensions. Perhaps you have felt it yourself. The friends you once laughed with now leave you feeling strangely empty. The routines that used to comfort you now feel monotonous, even suffocating. The ambitions you chased with such hunger begin to feel like someone else's dreams. It is as though you are living in a house that no longer feels like home. This is the first sign of transformation. The old world no longer contains you, and yet many people resist this call. They cling desperately to what is familiar, terrified to admit that they have changed. They stay in jobs that drain them, in relationships that no longer nourish them, in lifestyles that keep them half asleep. Why? Because the old, even when it hurts, feels safer than the unknown. To step into transformation means to walk through uncertainty, to admit that you are no longer who you were yesterday. This takes courage, because the world often praises consistency, not metamorphosis. But if you look to nature, you will see that transformation is its law. The caterpillar does not apologize when it no longer desires to crawl. The tree does not cling to last year's leaves, begging them to stay. They yield to the deeper rhythm that moves through them, and in doing so they fulfill their true form. The same is true of the human spirit. When the old no longer fits, when the life you once lived begins to suffocate you, you are being asked not to shrink yourself back into that space, but to step forward into the vast unknown of who you are becoming. And consider this: discomfort is rarely a punishment. More often it is confirmation. It is proof that growth is underway. Think of the teenager outgrowing their childhood shoes. At first, they only feel the pinch, the soreness. But that ache is not an injury. It is evidence that their body is expanding, that their bones are lengthening, that maturity is calling them forward. So too with the spirit. The restlessness, the dissatisfaction, the strange hollow feeling that creeps into once comfortable places, this is the ache of growth. It is the sign that your soul is outgrowing its current container. There is a story of a woman who spent years chasing perfection, perfect grades, a perfect marriage, a perfect image of herself on social media. She lived for approval, and for a time, the applause of others filled her cup. But then, slowly, it began to taste bitter. She no longer cared about looking flawless. She wanted to feel real. When she began to share her struggles openly, when she stopped curating her life for the praise of others, something remarkable happened. She felt alive again. The very identity she once clung to had died, and in its place a more authentic self was born. That death was painful, but it was also necessary. Transformation often feels like death in disguise. The old self resists being left behind. It whispers, "Stay here, it is safe." But safety is not the same as life. Life demands risk, it demands expansion, it demands the willingness to leave behind what no longer resonates. And while the old self clings, the new self waits in silence, urging you forward into uncharted territory. It is important to recognize that this process is not unique to a few extraordinary individuals. It is part of the human story. Studies in mental psychology reveal that we are not static beings. Our values, our identity, even our sense of meaning evolve across time. What felt urgent at 20 may feel trivial at 40. What inspired us in youth may bore us in maturity. This does not mean we are inconsistent. It means we are alive. So, if you find yourself restless in places that once brought you comfort, if your achievements now feel hollow, if your relationships feel misaligned, take heart. This is not failure. This is the soul's way of saying, there is more of you yet to be discovered. The discomfort is not a punishment, it is a confirmation. You are stretching into new dimensions, stepping beyond the confines of the old, and beginning to inhabit the vastness of who you truly are. And though it may feel frightening, remember this: the snake that sheds its skin is not left naked forever. In time, a new skin forms, one that fits more naturally, one that allows freer movement. In the same way, you too will find a new rhythm, a new container, a new life that resonates with the deeper truth of your being. The transition may feel uncertain, but uncertainty is the threshold of transformation. Thus, when the old no longer fits, do not despair. See it for what it is, a sign that your spirit is in motion. It is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of a new chapter. And though the chapter is unwritten, it carries within it the promise of authenticity, of alignment, and of a life that is no longer too small for the vastness of your soul. When transformation begins to take root in the depths of your being, you notice that the things which once amused and distracted you no longer hold the same weight. What once glittered before your eyes begins to appear dull, even hollow. The easy pleasures, the endless gossip, the momentary distractions that once kept your spirit occupied, these lose their power. It is not that you suddenly become incapable of enjoyment, but rather that enjoyment itself takes on a new form. What you long for now is not surface but depth, not noise but substance. The spirit that transforms begins to hunger for meaning. This hunger is not chosen consciously. It rises unbidden, like a tide that slowly but insistently covers the shoreline. You may even resist it at first, feeling guilty that you no longer enjoy what you once did. The music that once filled you with energy now leaves you unmoved. The television shows that once seemed so entertaining suddenly feel empty, repetitive, almost childish. And in their place a new desire emerges. You want words that nourish, stories that awaken, conversations that stir your soul rather than silence it. I recall a friend who once loved nothing more than long weekends of binge, watching her favorite shows. She would laugh, cry, immerse herself in the drama of fictional characters, and for a time it felt satisfying. But gradually she noticed a strange restlessness. The same shows no longer gave her joy. She felt, as she put it, hungry even after the meal. She was not bored in the conventional sense. Her life was not lacking in activity, but she realized her spirit wanted something deeper. She found herself seeking books that challenged her, conversations that stretched her, experiences that awakened something sleeping inside her. What had changed? Her spirit had grown beyond the surface, and now it sought the depths. The great paradox of life is that what is pleasurable is not always what is meaningful. There is nothing inherently wrong with pleasure. We are human, and delight, laughter, and rest are essential to our well-being. But when the spirit transforms, you begin to realize that pleasure alone cannot sustain you. Positive psychology has confirmed this truth. People who live only for pleasure may feel bursts of happiness, but those who pursue meaning report a deeper, longer-lasting fulfillment, even in times of hardship. This is the paradox. One who chases pleasure may lose it, but one who seeks meaning often finds joy as its companion. Think of someone who has spent years climbing the ladder of external success, perhaps accumulating wealth, admiration, recognition. For a time it satisfies, but eventually the applause begins to sound shallow, the rewards lose their flavor, and an inner voice begins to whisper, "Is this all?" This is the moment when the call to depth arises. It is not a rejection of the outer world, but an invitation to see beyond it. This hunger for depth can be disorienting because it changes how you interact with others. Conversations that once seemed stimulating now feel empty. Small talk begins to exhaust you. The endless chatter of gossip no longer holds your attention because you recognize that such talk only keeps people circling the surface of themselves, never daring to look beneath. Instead, you long for connection that touches the truth of existence, for dialogue that speaks not merely about events, but about the meaning of those events, not merely about achievements, but about the growth, the struggle, the vulnerability that lies behind them. When you are drawn to the depths, you begin to look differently at the world around you. A sunset no longer feels like just a pretty picture. It feels like a reminder of impermanence, a symbol of cycles larger than yourself. The smile of a child does not merely charm you. It reminds you of the innocence that still lives within your own heart, waiting to be reclaimed. A loss no longer seems like a meaningless accident. It becomes a teacher, shaping you into someone more compassionate, more awake. The surface no longer satisfies because you are beginning to see through it, into the mystery that lies beneath. And yet, to live from this place is not easy. The world often encourages us to stay on the surface, to consume endlessly, to chase pleasures that distract us from deeper questions. The marketplace of modern life thrives on keeping us entertained but not awakened, distracted but not transformed. To hunger for meaning in such a world can feel like swimming upstream. Friends may not understand why you no longer find joy in the same things, why you are not as easily distracted, why you prefer silence or reflection over noise and activity. At times, you may even feel isolated. But this is part of the journey. When your spirit is drawn to the depths, you can no longer shrink yourself back into the surface world. consider the lives of those who left comfort for something greater. The writer who abandoned popularity to explore the unspoken truths of the human psyche. The scientist who turned away from fame to pursue knowledge for its own sake. The teacher who left behind a higher salary to dedicate themselves to children in need. In each case, the choice was the same: depth over surface, meaning over glitter, and though the outer rewards may have been fewer, the inner life grew infinitely richer. Even in ordinary life, you may notice this pattern. The parent who once chased material comforts may one day find greater fulfillment in bedtime stories with their child than in any paycheck. The student who once obsessed over grades may discover a deeper satisfaction in the love of learning itself. The retiree who once filled their days with distractions may awaken to the beauty of simple presence, the sacredness of small things. All of these moments reveal the same truth. The spirit that transforms seeks not the fleeting but the eternal, not the surface but the depth. When you trade glitter for gold, you may lose the sparkle that once dazzled the eye, but you gain something far more enduring: substance. Gold does not shine as loudly as glitter, but it endures the fire, it holds its value, it carries weight. In the same way, when you choose meaning over mere pleasure, your life gains weight, your presence deepens, your very being becomes a vessel for something greater than yourself. This is why transformation stirs such a hunger for depth. It is not that the surface has no value, but that it cannot contain the vastness of the soul once it has begun to awaken. To be drawn to the depths is to hear the call of your own becoming, a call that invites you to live not for the shallow applause of the moment, but for the quiet, enduring resonance of truth. And though it may at times feel lonely, it is in this very longing for depth that you find yourself most alive, most authentic, most aligned with the mystery of what it means to be human. Pain is often seen as the great enemy, the dark force that interrupts our happiness, the shadow that falls across our brightest days. We are taught to avoid it, to numb it, to silence its voice as quickly as possible. Yet, when the spirit transforms, a new relationship with pain begins to emerge. The transformed spirit does not see suffering merely as a wound to be bandaged and forgotten, but as a messenger, a guide, a teacher that speaks in a language deeper than words. Hardship, heartbreak, failure, these are not punishments but invitations to look inward, to awaken parts of ourselves that were once asleep. Consider the end of a long relationship. In the beginning, the grief can feel unbearable. The silence in the room is deafening. The absence of the familiar presence feels like a hollow carved into the chest. At first, the instinct is to run from it, fill the days with distractions, cover the pain with new romances, drown it in noise. But for some, the call of the soul is stronger. Instead of fleeing, they sit with the ache. They begin to journal, to write the raw truth of their grief. They ask themselves difficult questions. What part of me was asleep in this love? Where did I give away my voice? What truth did I hide from myself in order to keep the peace? Over time, what once felt like an unbearable wound begins to transform into wisdom. The pain does not disappear, but it changes its form. It becomes a teacher that points toward a deeper understanding of self. Neuroscience now affirms what the soul has always known. Reflection during painful events activates regions of the brain connected to long-term growth and resilience. Pain, when engaged with consciously, literally reshapes the brain, cultivating greater strength and adaptability. The mind that embraces pain does not remain the same. It becomes wiser, stronger, more capable of facing the uncertainties of life. And yet, in the culture we live in, pain is often silenced. We medicate it, we hide it behind forced smiles, we pretend it doesn't exist. But what we deny does not disappear, it festers. The wound ignored becomes infection, spreading its poison quietly through the soul. It is only when we face pain, when we sit with it and listen to its message, that it begins to heal us. Transformation begins the moment we stop treating suffering as an intruder and start seeing it as a guide. There is an ancient truth hidden in myths and stories from every culture. The hero must pass through suffering before reaching wisdom. The exile, the betrayal, the descent into the underworld. These are archetypal experiences that remind us that growth is born in struggle. In modern life, these myths play out in quieter ways. The man who loses his job and feels the collapse of his identity, only to discover after deep reflection that his worth was never tied to his title. The woman who endures illness and emerges with a deeper appreciation for the fragile beauty of each day. The parent who grieves the loss of a child and, though never free of the pain, learns to channel that grief into compassion for others. Each of these stories speaks to the same truth. Suffering, when engaged with consciously, transforms us. It is important to understand that pain is not romantic. There is nothing glamorous about heartbreak, nothing noble in the raw ache of loss. Pain breaks us open, strips away illusions, forces us to face truths we would rather avoid. But in that breaking, in that stripping away, lies the possibility of awakening. A cracked vessel allows light to enter. A broken heart, when examined with courage, reveals the hidden patterns of love and fear that have guided our lives. Failure, when studied honestly, exposes the assumptions that kept us trapped in mediocrity. Pain is not an enemy, it is a mirror reflecting back to us the parts of ourselves we must confront if we are to grow. There is a phrase often heard, "Time heals all wounds," but this is not entirely true. Time alone does not heal. What heals is the willingness to face the wound with presence, to learn from it, to let it carve wisdom into our being. Without that, time may dull the sting, but the wound remains beneath the surface, shaping our behavior in ways we do not understand. The person who avoids the pain of betrayal may carry distrust into every new relationship. The one who ignores the grief of loss may harden their heart against love altogether. But the one who allows themselves to sit in the fire, to listen to the voice of pain, emerges transformed. We have all seen people who carry their suffering with grace, who, instead of becoming bitter, become deeper, more compassionate, more radiant. These are not people who were spared pain. Quite the opposite. They are people who allowed pain to teach them. They are the mother who, after losing a child, becomes a source of strength for other grieving parents. They are the man who, after surviving addiction, dedicates his life to helping others break free from chains. Their suffering became not just their wound, but their teacher, and in learning from it, they became teachers themselves. The transformed spirit does not seek pain, but neither does it fear it. It understands that suffering is part of the human story, part of the mysterious process of becoming. To be alive is to encounter loss, to face endings, to stumble and fall. But in every loss there is a seed of renewal, in every ending a hidden beginning, in every fall a lesson about the ground we walk upon. Pain teaches us humility. It reminds us of our limits. It awakens compassion by showing us our shared vulnerability. And most of all, it strips away the false layers of identity until we are forced to ask, "Who am I?" when all else is taken away. When transformation takes root, you begin to see pain not as something to escape, but as a threshold to pass through. You learn to welcome it into the circle of your life, to listen to its wisdom, to allow it to shape you into someone more authentic, more awake, more capable of love. This reframing of pain from enemy to teacher is perhaps the clearest sign that transformation is underway, for once you have learned to sit with pain and glean its wisdom, there is little in life that can truly defeat you. The world may wound you, but the wound itself will guide you deeper into your own becoming. When the spirit begins to transform, there comes a moment when the boundaries that once divided you from others begin to blur. You realize that the sharp distinctions you once clung to between you and them, right and wrong, deserving and undeserving, are not as absolute as you once believed. Instead, you begin to sense a thread that weaves through every human being, a thread that binds you not just to family, not just to friends, but to strangers, to those who oppose you, even to those who have wounded you. This recognition does not arise from sentimentality. It arises from a deep knowing that the same forces that move within you move within all people. What you see in another is also present in yourself, and what you condemn in others is often a shadow of your own unacknowledged depths. At first, this recognition can be unsettling. We are taught to see ourselves as separate, to protect our individuality, to define ourselves against others. Yet as the spirit matures, something shifts. Anger, once your first reaction, gives way to curiosity. Judgment, once your shield, softens into empathy. The walls of me and them grow thin, and through the cracks compassion enters. It is not weakness. It is not indulgence. It is the dawning awareness that to wound another is, in some mysterious way, to wound yourself. Think of Nelson Mandela, who after 27 years of imprisonment emerged not with vengeance burning in his heart, but with a vision of reconciliation. Most of us, placed in his position, would have been consumed by bitterness, yet Mandela recognized the deeper truth that his people's healing would not come through retaliation, but through unity. His spirit had transformed beyond the personal wound into a force that could embrace even those who had been his oppressors. This is compassion at its highest form, not passive acceptance of wrongs, but the refusal to perpetuate the cycle of hatred. You may say, "But I am not Mandela, I do not carry such a destiny." Yet this same transformation reveals itself in the smallest gestures of daily life. When a driver cuts you off in traffic, your old self may have erupted in rage, shouting, cursing, rehearsing the story of how you were wronged. But then one day you find yourself pausing. Instead of reacting, you wonder, perhaps they are rushing to the hospital. Perhaps they are carrying a burden I cannot see. That shift from anger to empathy, from assumption to curiosity, is no small thing. It is the awakening of your deeper nature. It is the recognition that the world is not divided into villains and heroes, but into people, each carrying their unseen struggles, each shaped by wounds you may never know. This awakening changes how you see even those closest to you. In the past, you may have judged your parents harshly, resenting their mistakes, carrying the weight of what they could not give you. But as your spirit transforms, you begin to understand. They too were shaped by forces beyond their control. They too carried wounds from their own parents, from their own time. This does not erase the pain they caused, but it softens the judgment. You begin to see them not as gods who failed, but as human beings who struggled. This recognition frees you. It allows you to forgive, not by denying what happened, but by seeing the shared humanity beneath it. Compassion does not mean weakness. It does not mean excusing cruelty or tolerating injustice. Rather, it means seeing clearly without hatred clouding the vision. It means understanding that even those who harm are often acting from their own wounds, their own blindness, their own fears. To meet them with compassion does not excuse their actions, but it prevents you from becoming like them. Hatred may feel powerful in the moment, but it corrodes the soul. Compassion, though quieter, strengthens you from within. In psychology, there is a well, documented phenomenon. When people experience suffering, they often become more empathetic toward others who suffer. Those who have endured grief can sit beside the grieving without needing to fix them, because they know the language of loss. Those who have struggled with poverty or hardship are often the most generous, because they understand what it means to go without. This is not accidental. It is the natural unfolding of the human heart when it refuses to let suffering harden it. Pain, when met with openness, becomes the doorway to compassion. In your own life, you may notice how this shared thread of humanity reveals itself in unexpected ways. A stranger's tears in a cafe may stir something in you, not because you know their story, but because you recognize in their trembling shoulders the same vulnerability that lives within you. The sight of a child laughing may bring joy not because they belong to you, but because their laughter awakens the child you once were. Even in conflict, when someone raises their voice against you, you may begin to sense not only their aggression, but also their fear, their need to be seen, their longing to be heard. Compassion allows you to see beyond the mask of behavior into the deeper truth of being. This recognition expands the way you live. You begin to speak differently, to listen more deeply, to carry yourself with a gentleness that others can feel even before you open your mouth. You become less interested in being right and more interested in being real. You stop asking, "How can I win this argument?" and begin asking, "What is this person truly trying to say beneath their words?" Your presence becomes a refuge for others, because they sense that with you they are not judged but understood. There is a quiet power in living this way. The transforming spirit realizes that compassion is not a luxury but a necessity. Without it, life becomes fragmented, relationships collapse into battles of ego, and the soul remains trapped in isolation. With it, even the simplest encounters become sacred. A smile exchanged with a stranger, a kind word spoken in passing, a moment of patience with a child. These small acts weave you into the larger fabric of humanity. They remind you that you are not alone, that none of us are alone, that we are all threads in the same vast tapestry. To recognize the shared thread of humanity is to awaken to the reality that the same light and the same shadow dwell in each of us. The cruelty you despise in another is a possibility within you, just as the love you admire in another is a possibility waiting to be lived more fully. This awareness humbles you. It dissolves arrogance. And in dissolving arrogance, it opens the heart to genuine connection. When the spirit reaches this stage of transformation, life itself takes on new meaning. Every encounter becomes an opportunity for understanding. Every conflict becomes a mirror. Every stranger becomes a teacher. And in seeing yourself reflected in the faces of others, you begin to understand that compassion is not merely a virtue. It is a recognition of truth. The truth that to wound another is to wound oneself, and to lift another is to lift oneself. It is the truth that, beneath all divisions, we are one. There is a moment in the journey of transformation when the restless search for approval begins to fade. The hunger for applause, for recognition, for the nod of validation from others slowly loses its grip, and in its place arises something subtler yet infinitely stronger, a quiet power. It does not announce itself with noise, it does not parade itself for admiration, and it does not depend on being seen. It is calm, steady, and rooted. It is not the power of dominance or conquest, but the power of alignment, the strength that comes from living in harmony with your innermost truth. In earlier stages of life, it is natural to measure yourself against others. Children look to parents for affirmation, students seek approval from teachers, Professionals chase recognition from bosses and peers. For a time, this fuels growth, giving direction and energy. But as the spirit transforms, you begin to notice how exhausting it is to constantly live for the gaze of others. Every compliment feels fleeting, every award quickly loses its shine, every recognition leaves you hungering for the next. Slowly, you come to realize that validation from outside can never fill the vastness within. It is here that something profound begins to shift. Instead of asking, "What will others think of me?" you begin to ask, "What do I truly think of myself?" Instead of wondering, "Will they approve of this choice?" you ask, "Does this choice align with the truth of my being?" The compass that once pointed outward now turns inward, and in this turning you find a freedom that no applause could ever give you. Take the musician who once performed for fame, tailoring every note to what would sell, what would please the crowd. At first, the cheers felt intoxicating, but eventually they rang hollow. Then one day, they sat with their instrument and began to play, not for anyone else, but for themselves. The music that emerged was raw, authentic, alive. It carried a different kind of beauty, the kind that comes not from calculation but from truth. They may never fill stadiums, but those who hear their music are moved in a way no superficial performance could achieve. This is the quiet power of authenticity. Or consider the parent who constantly compared themselves to others, measuring their worth against how well other families seemed to do. The comparison left them feeling inadequate, no matter how much they gave. But transformation comes when they stop asking how they measure up and instead ask, "What unique love can I give my child today?" In that moment, the pressure lifts. Their love is no longer about perfection, but about presence. And that presence, simple and sincere, becomes more powerful than any imagined standard. This too is the quiet power of alignment. Psychological research on intrinsic motivation confirms this ancient truth. When people are guided by inner values rather than external rewards, they not only experience greater happiness, but also show more creativity, resilience, and vitality. A life lived in alignment with inner truth taps into an energy that is both sustainable and renewing. It is no longer about chasing the next source of validation, but about drawing from a wellspring within that does not run dry. This quiet power is often misunderstood. It is not arrogance, for arrogance shouts and demands attention, while this power is content to remain unseen. It does not need to prove itself because it knows itself. It does not need to dominate others because it has mastered the inner battle. It is not boastful, but it is unshakable. It does not need to announce, "I am strong," because its strength radiates wordlessly through presence alone. You can feel this power in certain people. They walk into a room and without saying much the atmosphere shifts. They do not command attention, but they invite it. You sense that they are not acting from insecurity or ego, but from a place of deep alignment. Their calm is contagious. Their words, though few, carry weight. Their silence feels full, not empty. This is the mark of someone whose compass points inward, someone who has found their axis and no longer spins with every passing wind of opinion. The emergence of this power changes how you face uncertainty. Before, you may have been paralyzed by doubt, constantly seeking reassurance from others, terrified of making the wrong choice. Now, even when the path ahead is unclear, you carry an assurance within. This path may be uncertain, but it is mine. The fear does not vanish, but it no longer controls you. You begin to trust that as long as you remain true to yourself, each step will reveal the next. This trust is not naive optimism. It is the fruit of knowing that alignment with the inner truth always leads to growth. even when it leads through difficulty. This quiet power also reshapes your relationship with failure. When you live for the approval of others, failure feels devastating, as though it strips you of worth. But when you live from inner alignment, failure is no longer the end of your story. It becomes information, feedback, part of the process. The scientist who conducts an experiment does not despair when it fails, they learn from it. The same is true of the spirit transformed by quiet power. Each setback becomes a teacher, each misstep a guide, and the fear of humiliation fades because you no longer live for the judgment of others. It is important to see how this power ripples outward. A person who no longer depends on external validation becomes less reactive, less defensive, less easily swayed by the moods of others. They no longer need to compete endlessly or prove themselves at every turn. Instead, they are free to encourage others, to celebrate the success of those around them without feeling diminished. They can listen without judgment, speak without fear, and act without needing recognition. Their presence itself becomes a source of strength for others because it whispers, "You too can trust your own path." And perhaps the greatest gift of this quiet power is peace. Not the peace of a life without struggle, but the peace of knowing that even in struggle you remain whole. It is the peace of waking each day and asking not, "What must I do to be approved?" but, "What must I do to be true?" It is the peace of living without masks, of being at home in your own skin, of carrying within you a center that no storm can uproot. The emergence of this power is not a final destination, but it is a profound milestone in the journey of transformation. It is the fruit of letting go of what no longer fits, of seeking depth instead of surface, of allowing pain to become a teacher, of recognizing yourself in others. And when it blossoms within you, you know without needing to be told, your path, though uncertain, is authentically yours. And that truth, more than any applause, more than any recognition, is what sets the spirit free. So, when you notice the old no longer fits, when you hunger for depth, when pain becomes a teacher, when compassion awakens, and when quiet strength arises from within, these are not coincidences. These are confirmations. Your spirit is transforming, and in that transformation you are not losing yourself. You are discovering your truest self.